I haven't podcasted in since like one of the block parties for neighbor science.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, good sex titty, everyone. I'm Chloe.
I'm Una.
I'm Hermes.
And welcome to Black Flag Book Bag, a podcast book club thing for people with nothing better to do. And by people with nothing better to do, I mean me, and then two people with better things to do that I roped into it.
Hey, don't lump me into the productive category. I was playing
Anyway.
Minecraft before this. It doesn't count.
Gaudies.
What's the matter, Wagey?
Fucking wiki.
Okay, I was working too, so
Damn.
Yeah, exactly.
let's take it
Fucking-
easy there.
Anyway,
Today we'll be talking about alignment UU.
What?
flashbacks.
What the fuck even is that?
Wrong podcast.
Oh, sorry. I keep getting them mixed up.
Rebecca doesn't even remember our podcast.
Is this
You're so
hentai?
mean.
I
Yeah,
repressed all the hentai.
Why didn't you listen to the hentai podcast?
I listened to it, I just repressed it.
Well,
Why?
retain that information. It's important.
Because of that one episode that came out after a long break. You know which one I'm talking about.
That's a different podcast.
That's all of them.
No, the hentai podcast had one where it was just nothing
that-
for. Oh,
that-
was that Goth Angel Sinners?
Yeah,
That was
Angel
God
Center.
Angel Center.
I mean, you mainly talked about hentai on both podcasts, so it's kind of hard to
I think we
differentiate.
talked about very little hentai on Goth Angel Sinners.
It was mostly hentai.
So, anyway, book club. We all read a book together. And then we talk about the book.
We talk about the book. So our first book is Debt, The First 5,000 Years by David Graeber.
R.I.P. to a real one.
May he rest in peace.
It's a really sick book.
Graeber's easily like top 2 favorite authors. Just every
He's
time.
top one for me.
See, I'm ashamed, but I also like James C. Scott. You know,
Wait, what do you mean you're ashamed?
because fucking
Scott is clearly number 2.
Scott has
Fed.
yeah, Scott has Fed ties, but it's like, okay, well, the CIA were paying every researcher to do stuff, so like,
I mean, okay, we can talk more in depth about Scott and the CIA when we actually read a book by him, but like, it really doesn't mean anything. Like, Scott's research focused on non-state peoples and how they resist the state and sedentism, and the CIA has a vested interest in wanting to know how that stuff works. So, what is he supposed to do? Not accept all expenses paid trips to anywhere he wants in the world to study anything he wants? Like, this is just his research is just useful information for anyone to have on any side of any debate or fight regarding statehood.
yeah, I mean, I still got him on my shelf, and I quote his stuff about the Dark Ages a lot to people IRL.
Real.
Comes in handy
Anyway.
when people are like panicked.
So,
True.
Graeber, I haven't read a lot of Graeber in recent years. I haven't been reading a lot of nonfiction of late. Pretty good. Pretty smooth writing style. I mean, obviously, content-wise, very up there.
Mm-hmm. It's very thick and dense content-wise, and that's just true of most of Graeber's works that aren't just like essay collections. But
Or
he has a
pirating.
very conversational writing style that I find makes it very easy to approach. Like it's a 500-page book, but it is in my opinion, it is the fastest 500 pages I've ever read.
Yeah. No, same. I I might be a little biased because the other things I've been reading, besides Graeber are like fucking Deleuze. So like literally anything would be like feel like a cakewalk as opposed to that. It's just oh god. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So this was a breath of fresh air in a pit of torture.
Mhm. And just to going back a little bit, uh, talking about what we're going to be talking about today. This week we read the first two chapters of Debt, and the current uh, game plan is to read approximately two chapters a week and report back in podcast format. Um, but me and Termes have both read Debt before. So uh, so I'll refer back to the first time I read it or the second time I read it. Una, on the other hand, this is new information for you.
I mean, it's not really new information. It's just the first time I've read this book.
Yeah. It's not actually new information.
Una's done enough research on like medieval coinage or something to have just
Yeah,
figured this out.
Oh, I'll have takes on numismatics throughout. Yes.
Yeah, that's the thing about Una. Una doesn't read a lot of like modern writing on these things. Like Una doesn't like sit down and read like anarchist theory or like modern political economy studies because Una's too busy reading primary sources. So I would guess that a lot of the information contained in this book is not new to Una because one, for the last decade or so, Una has talked to almost exclusively people who have read this book, and also I wouldn't doubt that you have read about medieval coinage.
I like numismatics.
But it is your first time actually reading this book, and maybe anything like long form by Graeber.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a perfect start. Dead
Yeah,
is my favorite.
uh, yeah. One of the reasons I wanted to do this book first before we get into um, things I haven't read before or things that I started and never finished, or you know, whatever, is just because in my opinion, um, if you read one book in your life, it should be this. I think it is quite possibly one of the best books of anthropology, archaeology, political economy, history, like ever written.
I would agree with you, but my book that I think everybody should read is Kant's On a Supposed Right to Lie for a Moral Sense, something like that. Just so that you could be like, oh, Kant is like the dumbest person ever, and everybody should hate him and everything that came from him. But,
German
that's a
idealism,
close second.
67 trillion dead.
Kant has killed everybody who has died in the past 400 years. That's my opinion.
Why would your one recommendation to be a bad book?
Because it's like not that long and it's so stupid that anytime you read somebody who's like, oh yeah, Kant really inspired me, you could just kill them. But that would be a close second. It's especially anybody who's taken an economics class at all or like argued with somebody and they brought up economic shit because this is one of many great points in the entire like the entire field of economics is just fake bullshit that is just made up to, justify, uh, capitalism and the predecessors to that. So like,
Mm.
great
I love
book.
economics.
Kill Adam Smith in your head.
He'll be Adam Smith in your head.
I think it's nice to have books directly addressing kind of common sense interpretation, because like economics in the modern sense is vibes-based pseudoscience
Mhm.
that's mostly a religious project
Mhm.
to impose a sort of state morality, and it leads to just the craziest consequences, like complaining to your mom about inflation and she talks about supply and demand or something, and you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? What does that have anything to do with egg prices?
Did you hear me talking to my mom about inflation earlier?
No, I'm not. I'm referencing an actual conversation I had with my mother in which she brought up supply and demand, and I was just sitting there like, I don't understand how that could possibly lead to the current situation. Like, I'm sorry, did we kill all the chickens?
Okay, actually, here's how supply and demand works in reality and how it affects egg prices. There are a very few number of people who own all of the supply and a very large number of people who demand eggs, and so the suppliers are able to charge whatever the fuck they want for it, and that's it. And we don't, that's it. There's no push and pull between supply and demand. They just charge something, and we have to pay it if we really want it.
Yeah,
Or we can do a little shoplifting.
it's a system of uh, power dominance rather than any like actual like
Calm down, Jonathan Nitson.
what do you call it? Like it's not an emergent behavior of like the simple interaction of like value or something like
Mhm.
it's presented to be. It's a deliberate act of violence.
Mhm.
So like yeah, which first chapter of Debt is basically about that, but for debt. That's fun.
Mhm. Um, so yeah, getting into describing the contents of debt. I mean, we'll try not to do too much of just book summary because that's always lame. And also we want people to actually read debt, not just come to us for the cliff notes. But I think with regards to like questioning common sense on that, leading into the first chapter of Debt, it opens with this anecdote about is meeting someone at a party, and he talks about the like third world debt crisis and the IMF and the global justice movement. And the person he meets at the party's response to the question of, or to the suggestion of abolishing, global debt, or at least the debt to third world countries who, were essentially forced to take out loans and then forced to pay back exorbitant sums to make first world banks rich. Her response was, "Surely one has to pay one's debts." Um, and Graeber essentially spends the rest of the chapter saying, "Well, actually, no."
I think it brings up a lot of good points as to what will actually know entails in this case, which is why I was kind of leading into that with the premise of the chapter is very clearly and straightforwardly about the morality of debt and how there's like a common social view of it as a moral obligation of debtors to return their credit, which it's I think it's kind of implied, I feel, but not explicitly stated at any time, really, that like that sort of morality is seemingly a very deliberate project, you know?
Mhm.
Like,
The creation of a system of morality where we view things in terms of debt, in terms of exchanges, and specifically in terms of quantifiable, like uh, exchanges. It creates a system in which people with power, people with money, people with guns, or swords, axes, knives, spears, before guns were a thing, um, can make themselves the moral superior because they have those things. Like uh, if you owe someone a debt, you're morally inferior because you owe debt, because you borrowed something and you haven't paid it back yet. Um, but of course, that is the inevitable outcome where a lot of people are debtors when only a few people have most of the money, you know, or rather, most of the resources that money can acquire.
I, like, I guess the way I'd want to frame it is that religious ideals and moralism kind of become a soft power of oppression,
Mhm.
where, rather than, you know, I think at one point, Graeber directly references the kind of like creditor that will break your legs type
Mhm.
thing. But rather than that sort of direct violence, it becomes we don't have to invest in the infrastructure necessary to find you and break your legs. If you yourself like hold yourself to a kind of moral standard that doesn't allow you to like renege a debt,
Mhm.
which I feel like that's the kind of thing that the book might get into later. Again, I've never read it, so I don't know exactly. But
He does go deeper into the morality of debt and the
Spoiler
and
alert.
yeah. I know. Spoilers. He does go deeper into morality of it and religious notions of debt and things like that. Um, this is actually this is something that's touched on in chapter 2. Then, as well, is that there's the flip side to that, where the concept of owing of a morality of debt to a friend or family member or neighbor is a lot less uh, egregious. Um, the the obviously the one side where the idea the moral concept that owing a debt is a negative mark on your character. If you can't pay back a debt, you're a bad person, you're a failure, is of course bad, but also a lot of societies that are a lot more that are a lot better to their people do function on this sort of moral debt system where uh, I loan you or I give you eggs today because I know you're good for it. I know that if I ever need eggs or whatever you might have, then you'd be like, well, I'll give that to you because you've given me eggs so many times before.
Yeah, I think he draws a differentiation by calling it like debt versus obligation.
Yeah.
Um, and
At the start of chapter 2, uh, he opens chapter 2 with the question of what's the difference between a debt and an obligation.
I feel like the morality system that is built in order to, you know, mentally and societally like enforce these like debts, like without, with still probably the threat of force, but with less of it,
Hmm.
is if not not on purpose, not like shadowy cabal of people planning this, but like it effectively becomes like a war on like gift economies, or like that concept of like, obligation instead of debt, where like you're just helping each other out because you've got each other's backs, rather than like quantifying things and making everything impersonal and just like, a numbers thing. Like it has to be equal.
Once again, math is our mortal enemy.
Yes.
I guess I'd say it as like, the debt as a monetary scheme is attempting to subsume a more social interaction of actual like obligation and whatnot, so that yeah, the idea that you owe someone and therefore you constantly feel a need to take the opportunity to repay that gets taken advantage of by a monetary system in its place, I guess.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, exactly. Like as in a system where one, uh, out of just moral obligation, if I give you eggs one day because you need eggs, and I know that if I need something, I can come to you. Um, that is this is a phrase that hurts to say and hear sometimes, but that's just human nature. It really is. That you generally believe that at the very least, friends, family, and neighbors, and how far neighbors extends is, you know, depends a lot culturally and personally. But there's some amount of people in your social network that you feel comfortable doing that with. Um, and uh, the like monetary system of debt uh, preys upon that human instinct, um, to make you genuinely might feel bad if you borrow something from someone and you know you can't give it back, you break it, or like you get eggs from them one day and then they come to you asking for orange juice and you don't have orange juice. You know, you might genuinely feel bad about that, and that's fine. That's normal. That makes sense. That's a situation where it's normal to feel bad about that. But the system of monetary debt, proper, um, takes advantage of that human capacity for sympathy and uh, desiring fairness and justice, or whatever you want to call it, to create a system in which people feel bad because they uh, owe an insurmountable amount of money for needing medical care at some point in their life.
Yeah, or people constantly, you know, uh getting angry at students who, when they were 18, got taken advantage of for, you know, up to hundreds of thousands of dollars for school debt, even
Mm.
being, kind of young, and like, who knows what they want to do for their whole life when they're 18. So
I
it's
mean,
just
look, student debt is a very extremely fun uh, type of debt in kind of the modern incarnation of capital. In that, and it's something I occasionally kind of vaguely complain about, that in a sense college is now what high school was like a generation or two ago.
Mm.
And this, it leads to a lot of horrible consequences, such as it's not even really taking advantage of someone for not knowing what they want to do. It's, you know, getting a college degree is much like we socially still perceive getting a high school degree as, the bare minimum of educated enough to get a job outside of a small local community.
Mhm.
And so, like, that's a sort of debt that's just heavy on society in that, like, yeah, we create like all of the same judgments and for it and whatnot, but it's also one of the most just blatant, you're gonna owe people money if you live in society, and that's just how that will be. Like the type of people who make fun of or look down on people who have, tens or to hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt probably have a shit ton of credit debt. A lot of it was probably like forgiven at some point because it was probably attached to an LLC that got government forgiveness on it. And like that that's no even they're in debt. I guess is the point.
Mhm.
Uh,
One thing about bringing you back to something specifically mentioned in the book, uh, on the concept of one has to pay one's debts. Um, Graeber points out that no, economically, that you don't have to pay your debts. That's the point of like loans and interest and things like that. Is that like they banks are not encouraged to make irresponsible loans. If you if a bank was guaranteed to get its money back on every loan it ever put out, there'd be no reason for it to reject anything. Um, and in the case of student debt, you loaned hundreds of thousands of dollars to a teenager. Yeah, that's a stupid loan. You don't you should not have made that loan. You don't get that money back. So I'm for debt forgiveness,
no,
obviously.
I just want in the book when Graeber talks about the whole thing with economically it doesn't make sense to for loans to be guaranteed. I feel like the way it's approached in the text, to me, it's kind of unintuitive. I understand it. I kind of get that. Like, it's very much approaching it from a what would it mean uh, for debts to be guaranteed to be repaid, and like answering that with it means that like they're guaranteed to get their money back by enforcement. But like, I think at the same time you could take like an alternate approach of like economically speaking, if they were guaranteed to get their money back on their debts or on those debts, then it's almost as if that money was never spent in the first place.
Mhm.
Like its valuation doesn't change at all, because the person taking out the loan is not actually even spending it in a way
Mhm.
because because it's guaranteed to still be there at the end.
I would
And
say also with oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, that was it.
I was just gonna say, because student loans and medical debt operate under different, like, I think, is it student loans aren't applicable for bankruptcy or something like that? Either that or one of them isn't applicable for like most bankruptcies, and I feel like that effectively works as a way to ensure like higher levels of labor, it's not quite forced labor, but it's like, okay, well, you can't work 20 hours a week even if that covers your expenses because you got to pay back your debt, even if your degree nets you, like a position as like a doctor or something that pays you like well enough, you're so in debt that you can't just like take it like chill, you can't
That
you
is
can't work less.
that is actually one thing that I hadn't thought about, but I guess makes a lot of sense. It's just intuitive that like the rise in student debt and the promotion of college as being necessary for survival in the modern world, and the essentially the outsourcing of training by businesses to colleges. And as well as the insane rise in the average person's medical debt over the last, all this is happening over the last like 20, 30 years or so. Creates a system where everyone is in perpetual debt. And so everyone needs to be constantly working more and more. So it's interesting that college debt and medical debt essentially work together in the modern day to create a system in which there's more demand on people to have more money, and that's not necessarily going to immediate needs like food and rent. So people have to work more hours in a week to cover their student loans that they're paying off, or where otherwise we're in a previous generation where people were graduating with maybe a few hundred or a couple $1,000s in student debt. Nowadays, we're graduating with tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt. And so, for a previous generation, they pay off their debt pretty quickly, and then they can get to quote unquote living their life. Whereas nowadays, we don't get to do that. We have to, beyond that grind, work, work 50, 60, 80 hours a week. Because in addition to food, rent, electricity, water, utilities, we've also got, the monthly student loan payment, the monthly medical payment from that time you got in a car accident or whatever.
I think notably about that, and this is particularly relevant to how I've lived my life. You can always get cheaper food and cheaper rent. It's hard for the rent part, but it's possible. You can find cheaper alternatives. You move to a cheaper area, you buy less fancy food that's, food that's even more likely to kill you than standard market food. But the loan payment, you have to be in real shit, like never have an income at all for the government to be like, yeah, nobody can enforce you paying that right now. And it's always up in the air on whether or not they're allowed to continue collecting interest on it, which is great. But it ensures you don't have an out because you always have a set amount of expense back into the system. And I think it's really fucking funny that the whole reason that's happening is that colleges are businesses competing for customers, and the way they do that is by perpetual renovation, and the students all pay for that, and it's great. It's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only one way to avoid the cycle of the threat of medical debt and student loan debt, and that's to join the U.S. military, baby. Our numbers are down.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's the other half of the ploy,
It is the other half of the ploy. If you want to not be in debt, you know what you can do? You can kill.
Sorry, I have to get this out because it's just stuck in my head now. But you constantly hear college students complain about how campuses are always under construction, but they're not complaining about it right. You should be royally pissed off at all times every time you see construction on your campus. Anyway, yes, the military, the worst institution. Which brings me to a tangential point about this whole continuous debt, which I think Graeber kind of touched on at some point, where a lot of this is in essence the same as protection fees.
Mm-hmm.
You're allowed to live, and therefore it costs money for your existence to be allowed, and so you must pay us back.
Mm-hmm.
But I think kind of the key of like liberalism and whatnot is laundering that kind of thing. So, like, the US government is likely not going to just straight up say that every American citizen owes them their lives. They'll launder it and whatnot. Our freedom is protected, that kind of thing. And, so, just kind of create this notion that that debt is there for a very good reason, and like it's not a like a, it's not an imposition, it's an equal trade, that kind of thing, which very fun, very cool. Personal finance.
Personal finance. Speaking of protection money, bringing it back to things stated by Graeber in the book, the U.S. foreign debt. I had the unfortunate experience recently of clicking on a video where Elon Musk was speaking, and he was talking about the debt and the deficit, and it was infuriating, but it was also just like mind-boggling how little he like understood what he was talking about. Um, like he was like, the level of debt is unsustainable. We can't have we can't have so much debt. So we need to reduce the debt. We need to eliminate the debt. And it got it it fucked me up because um it like made me realize just how insidious the concept that we need business people running the government because they know how to deal with money or something like that is. Like, obviously, there's a moral opposition to that I've always had, where it's like, well, the government's job isn't to turn a profit. The government's job is to take care of its people or something like that. Um, there's the moral outrage one could feel over that, where when people talk about reducing government spending to curb the deficit and the debt, what they're saying is taking away housing and healthcare and food and water from people. But so you could be morally outraged at that, but there's also the fact that it's just wrong. It's just incorrect theory of like how money works at a government level, at a federal government level specifically, where they think they need to balance the checkbook. They think they need money in to equal money out. And that's just not how money works at a federal level. That's not what money is at a federal level. And Graeber describes the U.S. foreign debt as like essentially protection money from the U.S. empire, which is what it is.
Tribute.
It's tribute. It's you know you you give us money, we put military bases in your country. And like and it ties their economic prosperity with our economic prosperity. um, China or South Korea or Germany or France or Saudi Arabia or whoever is a holder of U.S. Treasury bonds then has a vested interest in the U.S. dollar succeeding and maintaining value, and the U.S. economy doing well. Um, anyone who is invested in the U.S. dollar like that, if our economy shits its pants, they're fucked too, and so they don't. They are beholden to the United States' whims because of that. The U.S. debt is not like the U.S. national debt is not an obligation we have to China or to Germany or to Saudi Arabia. It's them having an obligation to us. And you know, personally, I want the U.S. empire to burn to the ground. But these people who are ostensibly pro-American empire are saying we need to eliminate the debt are just fundamentally wrong as to what it is, and it's and what's going to inevitably happen when these people get their way is there's going to be a huge financial crisis, a global financial crisis, and they're going to make off with a lot of money in their Swiss bank accounts, and everyone else is going to be starving in the streets.
The quote unquote like pro capitalist people now have like just don't know how to do capitalism. Not even like the thing that's sold about capitalism with its like, competition, but like the actual capitalism of, hey, let's maximize exploitation while like tricking people into thinking they're in like a free, and fair like deal. They don't even know how to do that anymore. They're like at some point in the past, like, since Reagan, all the like rich people and people in government got together and were like, hey, those breadcrumbs we keep like passing down, those actually look pretty delicious. Let's go ahead and keep those on our plates. Why are we even giving them to them? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And it's like, all right.
I think one of the fun things about businessmen in government talking about debt is that they probably own a shit ton of treasury bonds. Second point,
That is true.
the discussion of debt owed to the U.S. as tribute makes it kind of a point that the quote at by the chapter title, I forget what those are called. There's a term for it, and I swear I don't know it actually. Anyway, it's diegetic. The diegetic quote. Because it's the one about if you owe the bank, what's the
You
whole
owe the
thing?
bank $1,000. The bank owns you. I have the book right in front of me. I'll just. Yeah, if you owe the bank $100,000, the bank owns you. If you owe the bank $100 million, you own the bank.
Yeah, it's the same thing, but with international trade, essentially,
Mhm.
where we owe countries so much money that like.
If we default on the debt, they are ruined.
Mm-hmm. And that's fantastic. We are a debtor country through and through. It's we play it the right way that way.
We can do a little bit of economic colonialism.
Yeah,
It's just like colonialism.
but with Neo in front.
Oh no, I wasn't going to add a but. It's just like colonialism. It's just colonialism.
It tricks the dumbest people into thinking that it's like fair somehow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's the Commonwealth. It's not an empire.
Mm-hmm.
They just, write their laws based off of what we tell them to. They're economically dependent on us. They're basically suburbs, but in country form.
IMF enforced austerity. That's a tongue twister.
IMF enforced austerity.
Okay, well,
get owned.
You're just a pro.
Oh yeah.
IMF enforced austerity.
Okay, I'm just
Nice.
stupid then. All right, I get it.
No, the austerity thing is kind of hard because the break there.
You're both just word nerds.
Ouch. I'm a nerd about a lot of shit that's mentioned offhandedly in this book, like ship breaking.
Real.
Which, I would like to draw a point to ship breaking real quick. He talks about international trade dying down during the Great Recession, right, in 2008. But like, in a lot of places, like the U.S. likes to masquerade as if we recovered from 2008, but the consequences of it are like apocalyptic bullshit happening all over the world, such as ship breaking. And like cruise ships use the ship breaking facilities where people die less often as a PR expense. It's a whole fucked up industry. The turnaround on it, the amount of danger in it, the lack of oversight, the number of economies that are completely dependent on it. It's all crazy. And a lot of that, like, really upped in scale when a bunch of shipping companies shut down. And, like,
I wonder if there's been any times in the last 20 years where a bunch of shipping companies shut down.
Couldn't happen. They're too big to fail. International shipping is a forever thing. We have to keep burning, like, non-renewable fuels to move massive amounts of cargo across the ocean, and under flags that aren't our own, of course. And the whole thing's fucked.
Back
Okay.
and forth across the ocean, oftentimes.
I'm going to edit this out because I don't want people to know I'm stupid.
No, don't reference it, then you can't cut it out.
Oh, no. I'm going to leave in the me saying I'm going to cut out the part where you said NATO alloyed.
No, just leave that part in. Anyway.
But actually, related. So towards the end of chapter 1, Graeber describes hearing people talk about the, quote unquote financial instruments people were utilizing prior to the 2008 crash. And how people in finance at the time were like, oh, these are such big, important, and complex calculations that no one else could possibly understand them. And they talk about bringing astrophysicists in to Lehman Brothers to program the algorithms for these stock trades and whatnot. And and Graeber says he remembers thinking, suckers. And that's how I feel every time I hear someone talk about AI. That, like, it's very clearly a scam, and like, and as well as crypto too, cryptocurrency, a very obvious scam that relies on the people selling it to you convincing you that they are smarter than you, that this is beyond your comprehension, this is beyond anything we've ever seen before. And so I just can't wait for every tech company in the world to completely crumble under its own weight.
At the same time, probably, too.
Probably 6 months from now. Calling it now. In fact, I'd be willing to make an investment on that claim.
Google bailed out in our lifetimes.
I'd be willing to short that bet.
Well, another reason people are so likely to fall for financial scams and stuff is because everybody's in debt, and also credit has been, laxly available for the past like 30 years or something. Where it's just like, oh, you make 20,000 a year, you could totally get this $500,000 mortgage. It's fine. You could do it. It's great.
I feel like part of it also is that the consequences, while seemingly dire, are partially inevitable, regardless of you falling for it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, because they were just packaging. It wasn't the mortgages
No, yeah,
themselves.
even if
It was.
I mean debt in general. You are in debt because you exist. So what's the point of not taking out a load of loans that you can't repay ever?
Mhm.
Like, many people think like this.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the thing. Even if you save responsibly and spend responsibly and only take out loans you can pay back, and you minimize your college debt, you quote unquote do everything right, you still face the economic consequences of banks making irresponsible and predatory mortgage loans. Like you still face the economic consequences of everyone having $100,000 in college debt.
Liquidity crisis, bitches.
Woo! U.S. government bailout in our lifetime.
U.S. government bailout of U.S. government in our lifetime.
So yeah, that's chapter 1, I think.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about chapter 1. Chapter 2, everything
Yes.
you were ever taught in school is wrong, and you're stupid for believing it.
One guy made up some bullshit and nobody checked it, and the people who did check it were nobody. So
I actually think that's one of chapter 2 is called The Myth of Barter. And it's largely about and debunking this concept that money. So first of all, Graeber states that money is debt. Debt is money. They are intrinsically linked to each other, and so a history of debt is a history of money. And I don't remember if he actually states this explicitly, but that also means that a history of money necessarily has to be a history of debt. But a lot of histories of money aren't histories of debt. A lot of histories of money are completely made up bullshit, such as the history of money that Adam Smith made up in The Wealth of Nations. And then every economics textbook you've ever seen in an economics class in every college across the United States and the Imperial Core is tells you.
notably, they're total bullshit on account of the money implies debt thing on account of their belief that credit comes after money in history.
Mhm.
And I would like to point out that doing definitions, I believe Graeber quotes, and I'm not sure if it's a direct quote or just like a kind of
Summary.
a summary of just like economics texts in general. But they're defining money as what is it like? Facilitates transactions, like something about
A
accounts.
unit of account,
Yeah,
medium of exchange, and a store of value.
right. And so the problem with that, and like the problem with saying that like what came before money economically, and then saying that money is any means of economics, or like any manner by which people determine how to distribute stuff, because distribution inherently requires exchange and value,
Mhm.
is that there is no pre-money distribution
Mhm.
because any distribution is money. So, that's fun. But also, that contradiction isn't pointed out, but it's kind of a clear origin point for the rest of much of what the chapter talks about, which is, that barter can only exist as a consequence of systems with money no longer having money.
He doesn't say barter can't exist. I what you said is mostly correct. I just want to clarify a little thing.
Yeah, it doesn't say it can't exist, just that.
Barter as the main means in which one does economy only ever really happens in among groups of people who are used to money existing, and thus are essentially doing money but without money present.
Right. We're doing the fun definitions miscommunication based on scope. So to establish, unless otherwise specified, when we say barter, we mean the system of economics that is predominantly based on barter and not simply anyone engaging in the act of bartering.
Yeah.
And it's also specified that the kind of barter that Graeber's talking about is like people living in the same village, because like technically bartering existed with like outsiders and like other towns, and he says it was done between people who would be enemies, but like that's, I mean, realistically that's just trade, which is like a different
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So like
He points out that like that, and this is where I was bringing in what I wanted to clarify from Una's statement is that like barter does exist as an economic means even among people who don't use money, um, but it's generally used very sparingly. Frequently, it's between people who would be enemies or otherwise just complete strangers who will probably never see each other again. It's frequently done on group scales rather than, I have eggs and you have orange juice. Would you like my eggs for your orange juice? It's done as like a group of people go up to each other and are like, we have spears, you have cloth. Let's all exchange a bunch of spears for a bunch of cloth.
Can't even come
and
up with
also
their
have
own
a lot of
example.
sex.
We're talking about the book.
And
Can't
also
even
have
come
a
up
lot
with
of
their own
sex.
example.
Trade cloth and spears and fuck each other a lot.
Yeah, and also that frequently, frequently examples of barter happening are a lot less like boring than Adam Smith and economists describe it.
Yeah, it's like a
Frequently,
fight.
frequently it takes the form of rituals, games, a sort of like play fighting almost. Like it's very infrequently is it someone showing up with a with a clipboard and a checklist saying, okay, so this many chickens is worth this many cows.
I think it's funny because Graeber does essentially point out that the way economists describe a hypothetical system of barter is telling to their understanding of modern economics more than anything.
And their lack of an imagination for
Right.
what another thing could be.
Right, and they're centering it on like a very base form of like transactionality and whatnot. And like I think it's pretty clear, like if you actually imagine like a pre-money society, like they don't exist concurrently with any societies that use money, and like they would have no way of knowing if there was, and they have yet to develop any such system, and they did bartering. And if you imagine that the way economists do, you just doubt human capacity, which is funny. Because like either you believe that nobody ever thought beyond what was immediately in front of them, like a 2-month-old baby, or you're the type of person who interacts with people on a very transactional basis and everyone hates you. It's one or the other.
Well, they're economists. They are babies and everyone hates them. So.
Right. So, because like the idea that, one can kind of temporally barter, if you will, that I will trade you something that will be, that your exchange will come to me in the future, and I'm not sure what it even is yet, but I know that you're good for it. That kind of thing is just a thing people do all the fucking time, and I don't know like how like one comes to the conclusion that that's only possible in modern society. But it's wild, and I think it kind of brings about the kind of key point of why I think it's very prescient to call it a myth of bartering, in that it is a single myth carried out by from sacred texts of Adam Smith onward. That like it's just a myth that can't be rewritten, it can't be augmented, and it just perpetuates itself because it's a really good story to justify the extreme heinous bullshit you're about to do with economics.
I think I think that ties back to a foundational and systemic issue with economics, is that economics posits itself as like a science, or like a like a like a factual, like scientific process seeking, system of theory. But when in fact, pretty much all of economics is just, all right, what happens? All right, let's like backtrack and make a model to justify it. And then most of these models don't even fit or are just outright lies half the time, like supply and demand and stuff. They just come up with stuff after the fact to try to explain stuff, and they're usually wrong. And this is just the same thing, but it was happening at the birth of economics, and before, because Graeber briefly mentions that Aristotle was also like a dumb guy when it came to this. Was like, yeah, it must have been people just trading stuff together.
To answer the question of like why economists and Adam Smith before them tell this like myth and to like and whether or not they why they would think this way about the world, and the answer is they don't think this way about the world. They don't think it's true. They know it's not true. They know it's a lie. They are lying. um, because in order to justify the existence of their field of study, um, and they need to uh, they need to promote it as a study independent from other things. The economy needs to be a separate, identifiable, observable thing that you can have laws and formulas about, that you can have theories about. That functions separately from politics, from ecology, from all these other things. And the answer is that you can't. It's not a separate thing. And the division between economics and politics as a study was the worst thing Adam Smith ever did, and he's burning in hell for it to this day.
I think it falls into a larger problem of one of my other favorite books is Dialectic of Enlightenment by Adorno and Horkheimer, I think.
Mhm.
I don't often recommend philosophy because it's like, if you're into that, okay, cool, we can have a conversation, but it's so inaccessible and stupid for anybody who doesn't, except for Dialectic of Enlightenment. It's very fascinating, recommend it. But what it posits, and I'll summarize it in case I can trick Una and Chloe into reading it. Um, is that, like, during the Enlightenment and afterwards, people were just so obsessed with like making everything into a natural science and
Mhm.
like just trying to make themselves into these like fancy secular gentlemen who did like science and were like founders of new fields of science, and they all did things the same way. And then that's why you get, like Adam Smith and or John Locke, and later on like Hegel, and like from that Marx. Marx tried to make a natural science out of sociology and
Mhm.
like utopian economics, sort of political economy, and like all of it just ends up being, foundationally flawed because it's like it's trying to separate these things and isolate them into like their individual things, but it's like nothing does that ever in anything. Why would categories of information do that too? Like, why would economics not be affected by sociology and geography and history and all this stuff? And it's just like, oh no, we're crafting this field to separate it from politics and morality so that we can like, make it this foundational thing that's just terrorizing everybody.
Yeah,
Just
you
their
had me
core
sold
value.
at the second clause of the first sentence, but here's the thing. Fuck the Enlightenment.
Yes.
It is more or less a direct consequence of pre-Enlightenment, pre the sciences in general, the existence of cults in Greek society, i.e., you don't overstep your bounds. But like, it's not overstepping your bounds, but that's kind of like how it's treated. Like, we're not allowed to start theorizing about politics or geography or ethnology or whatnot, because we're the cult of economists. This is our thing, and we're only allowed to theorize about distribution of goods and monetary systems. And like, it just all follows from there. Every cult needs to have its exclusivity, it needs to have, its own internal language, and it has to have its scope, and it has to stick to it, which is great. It's great how the Enlightenment totally didn't fix that, and instead just tried to assert that all of those cults were in charge because they were smart. Yeah, technocracy, baby.
That's one thing that Nitzen and Bickler talk about in Capitalist Power is that the division between politics and economy, in terms of area of study, is just one of the many heinous things that Adam Smith and his followers, it got even worse in the 20th century, did, and it just makes the whole study of, the economy, quote unquote, just completely useless, because because they just can't recognize the things that actually make economy, as in the distribution of goods and resources, move. What makes that stuff go, which is largely a political process.
Yeah, it's like how supply and demand as a concept only works if you assume supply and demand are natural forces.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite things from Capitalist Power is when, to prove economists wrong, a bunch of people just called businesses and were like, hey, how do you set your prices? They asked a bunch of major business price leaders how they set their prices, and most of them were just like, yeah, we just set them to what we can get away with. Like, from their own mouths, they're like, we set these prices to whatever the fuck we think
supply
we
and
can get the most
demand do
money.
not matter. We set them as high as we can to meet our capitalization goals for the quarter. Like, that's how it works.
Yeah, they'll be like,
how
we
high
spent
they can is defined by supply and demand.
No, it's defined by the biggest companies who just set it to whatever, and then all the little guys have to follow suit.
It's defined by whatever the biggest companies want, and relative to the purchasing power of everyone else.
Yeah, it especially works great when there's a scapegoat, like a global pandemic or something.
Mm-hmm.
Also, global pandemic is redundant. Why did this happen? Anyway.
Okay, you ever notice pandemic in a country?
You guys ever notice that nothing got better after the global pandemic?
After. Anyway,
hey, every food place does fucking carry out now, so that's pretty dope.
That sucks.
I like walking away and eating something somewhere.
Everything got expensive and everything got worse, and now everything is just worse and everything is just more expensive.
Look, I will say, inflation definitely hit me hard, but the worst food inflation stuff, I happen to be immune at the perfect time because my ass went vegan and I don't got to worry about milk, eggs, and meat prices, which that has been the main food thing for the past 5 years. It's just eggs are $1,000 a dozen.
Get owned, meat eater.
Yeah, exactly.
It's way out of scope, but I've mentioned this before, that everything's worse because they fired everyone and now they don't have the money to bring them back. It's a labor issue. Isn't that cool? Hooray.
Mm-hmm.
Marx was right or something.
And if supply and demand was true, wages would be through the roof right now, but...
Give me a segue that leads into talking about numismatics. I want to talk about numismatics now.
Hey, what is the thing you just said? Numismatics?
Yeah, what is
numismatics?
Numismatics. The study of
Numismatic?
coins.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Well, just say that.
Oh, I want to talk about coinage.
Yeah,
Show me your coin, humble traveler.
Well-
say coinage like a real highwayman.
I got a segue. Graeber posits that credit systems preceded coinage by thousands of years.
Oh, that
No,
just
that's
makes sense.
Yeah, anyone who knows shit about fuck, that's just like obvious.
and as the resident dumb guy, I did not know. I
Okay,
did not
that
know that.
one's intuitive. Okay, right here. If I give you something and say you owe me a favor in return, what's the infrastructure required in supporting that?
I mean,
Favors.
I would assume that I just need to meet you in an alley or something at some point.
Yeah, right. And but
Smooth sexual.
if I give you something and you give me a minted coin in return, what's the infrastructure required in that?
There needs to be a mint. There needs to be a reason to accept a coin. As
Right.
in, it means
Military.
as other people need to accept coins. It needs, or at least someone of importance needs to accept coins.
Right. And you either need to have a mine to get the material for the coins, or you need to be importing the goods for the coins. And it requires a significant amount of infrastructure to develop something that would work as coinage. So, like, obviously, that didn't come first.
Whereas there's no infrastructure required for promises and obligations.
Oh, I do
Worst
know
case
that
scenario, you need writing.
I've read Against the Grain.
And the bare minimum amount of infrastructure needed for numerical transactions is some way to keep track of them, and it doesn't necessarily have to be coins. It would, coins require a lot of very specific infrastructure, such as you said, mines and mints.
It's all grains.
Whereas, like, something like just a ledger of keeping track of who owes what to whom, that just requires, like, reads that you can make markings on, like that.
Mhm.
Oh, that does remind me of one of my favorite things that we passed over I think it was in the first chapter, but it was it was first chapter, about how pretty much every revolutionary movement in like the ancient world and if you go back far back enough in history was to cancel debt and distribute land, and like most revolutions still go attack like bureaucratic buildings where records of like debt or like land holding and stuff are. So like it's noticeably the enemy to everybody around.
Mm-hmm.
And also I should have I guess I totally forgot that I had read about pre-coinage like grains being used as taxes in Against the Grain. So that's my bad. That was like 6 years ago, though. So it's it's
Hey,
pretty flushed away with bad TV shows.
so Graeber talks a bunch about what was it the lack of usage of coins in systems where they're available at all, and how like easily replaced they were and all that. But fun little consequence of that he doesn't correct. Uh, Pointed out there was a thing earlier where I think in one of his like block quotes, someone mentions that printing coins reduces the need for or like replaces having to weigh coins or like weigh metals, which just isn't true at all. Like, that's just not true. Especially given the fact that as he mentions, coins again were infrequent, and the type of people that would use them frequently would be like merchants and whatnot, people moving large amounts of goods that are beyond like the usage of a single household. And so like the valuation of coins obviously is scaled to that, to long distance trade and trucking and all that. And so like the value of a coin would be beyond what one would reasonably spend at any given time. And like this is why you get like with historical coins and stuff like that, like we have bills that are, with $1, $2, $5, $10, right? But like with like some historical systems, like we're doing stuff with the old Japanese one, where you get like the mon, and then like is worth 1/4000th of a ryo, and like there's like halves of a ryo or quarters or even sixteenths, but that's still like 250 mon, because like the gap in like the usage of coin, as like for like transactions for long distance trade versus like what a normal person might need on a daily basis is just so big. And like you think about like nowadays, like the amount of money like being spent on like a single like semi truck's load, that has commas in it. You don't spend like money with commas in it when you like go to get lunch.
Mhm.
Most people don't.
That's actually in I can't remember if this actually came out of the book or if it was in a different thing. I think it was in the book, where in medieval Europe, the system of money they used is pounds, shillings, and pence. But pounds were never actually minted. Uh, like they never they in terms of the specific, pound, shilling, pence, they're in medieval Europe, they're referring to like Charlemagne's monetary system. Uh, they never minted pounds. That was a denomination that was so big, no one would ever use that. That was only used as a system of accounts for merchants and governments and things like that. Day-to-day life, people only ever really used pence and half pence and quarter pence.
Because like a pound would weigh a literal pound.
So you both talking about larger denominations being largely used for trade versus like everyday spending made me look up, hey, what what bills did we have in the US before digital, or like wire
Are you gonna
transferring,
find out about half pennies?
No, I'm finding out about $100,000 bill and the $10,000 bill, which I did not know existed. But
Oh
like,
yeah, I got a few of those in my wallet right now.
yeah. Well, if you have
Right.
a 19, what is it, a 1934 $100,000 bill, it's worth like $2.3 million.
Wow,
Right.
I got
Yeah,
a few
but
of them.
the point I was getting to with that initially is that in some cases, even with the smaller denominations, you still don't have as small as people might need, and so people just cut them,
Hmm.
right? And you need to weigh that shit. Like minting a coin doesn't like negate people needing to weigh things, especially like because minting is an assertion of political power, right? Like the fact that you minted this coin says that like our government is issuing money. This is our money, and like, it holds value and all that, and like it's special because it's ours. But like, is everyone going to trust each other enough on that?
Not
Like,
without a military.
you're right. And like,
So you're
they're not. And like, I feel like the implication in that is kind of like, oh, we're talking about like when the Roman Empire was minting and whatnot. But even then, it's like they weren't totally unified on that.
so
And
your critique here is in fact that Graeber didn't spend enough time ripping economists a new one.
yeah,
He could have added another like 5-10 pages.
yeah, no, there could have been way more about how they just say shit. They just make shit up.
One thing I want to say is I've interacted with David Graeber once. I wish I could have met him in person or something like that. Or like if I could have spent like hours picking his brain, I would have. But I interacted with him once on Twitter in like 2018 or 19. I asked him if he had read Capital is Power. Um, and throughout our whole conversation here, I keep thinking, damn, he's reaching a lot of the same conclusions as Nitzen and Bickler did. And we'll probably read Capitalist Power at some point for this. So I won't go too deeply into that. But he said he hadn't read it, but that he was familiar with essentially the cliff notes of it, and that it was a. He said a lot of from what he knows about it, a lot of it is just like pretty intuitive stuff, for anyone who actually understands the history of uh, states and money and the economy, as it were. And um, that's just my aside, where I lament the fact that I never learned whether or not before in the few years between his death and that interaction if he read the book.
That's what killed him.
died from CASP withdrawals.
Great part about how, like, information debunking Adam Smith's fake telling of, like, indigenous American groups bartering with each other inside their villages just being, like, immediately debunked in, like, anybody talking or interacting or studying indigenous groups at all. What was it in the Six Nations of Iroquois?
Yeah, kind of. There's no way he could have known, so he was just making shit up, but everyone else after him just following him instead of caring to check.
I
I
believe it
mean,
was
as
first book he couldn't have known, but second book, or like when he was still interacting with things and could have known after that because it was in, the what was it, the Glasgow Library.
Mhm.
That ain't what he said. I
But
read the book. Those ain't the things.
I mean, as I said, he theoretically might not have actually had access to information on these things, and so it's almost sort of forgivable that he, just pulled an like fairy tale out of his ass. Um, but everyone else didn't bother to check. No, they checked. They're aware. They know that they are lying.
I mean, they didn't check like the ones immediately following after him. Okay, again, to a certain extent, it is a deliberate thing, but there is also, again, that whole thing where the sciences are cults. They
Mhm.
don't interact on purpose. And so, like, they would see no reason to correct it because they would see no reason to check, because checking would mean like reading reports from like ethnologists or explorers or surveyors or what have you, and that's just not their field. They don't give a shit about that. They wouldn't read anything written by those people.
Also, you're right, I misremembered. Of
Yeah,
course.
dumbass.
Yeah, you stupid dummy.
Yeah, so there's just a lot about the trade type bartering between groups, and the which like again, that is in essence what trade is, uh but also I do see the reason for saying that like international trade is different, because like a lot of that does also fall under credit,
Hmm.
because a lot of it is like strong arming into bad deals, but through credit, through like neocolonialism and shit.
The important differentiation that is implied, I guess, is that, like, they're the inside of the village, like, you're with your neighbors, like, people generally were, like, pretty lax with each other and just, like, were neighborly, whereas like Adam Smith and all of the economists are just like everybody always was just, thinking numerically and trying to like, make sure all of their ledgers were balanced and like, this is just how it's always been, so feel normal about it. Where it's like,
I mean, yeah,
no,
that's one of the great myths of economics. One of their founding myths is the idea of the rational actor. Um, a person that is purely rational and only makes decisions based on their own uh, personal self-interest, of which they understand perfectly. They have a perfect understanding of their own wants and needs as well. Um, and there's never been such a person on the face of the earth.
yeah, it's just an attack on mutual aid or whatever.
But yeah, just a lot of examples of barter and stuff in the second chapter.
Mhm.
I feel like third chapter is going to expand on that, possibly.
To some extent.
Yeah, looking forward to it, possibly. To some extent.
I'm holding a gun to Una's head and forcing her to read a book. It's awesome.
Well, I've got nothing else to say about those two chapters.
I think we've been recording for like 2 hours. I think we've covered 2 chapters.
We're in 45. It's the introductory podcast.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
gotta
yeah. We had to
we gotta
state
get
our
it all.
opinions on the current debt crisis facing hundreds of millions of Americans.
Yeah, we
Thanks
just
for
had to do that.
Yeah.
thanks for tuning in to
So thanks
what the
for
fuck was
tuning
the name of
into
this?
our little book club.
You
What the fuck
picked
was the
the
name of
name.
this?
you picked the
Black
name.
Flag Book Bag.
Yeah.
Be sure to check out anarchy.website and
Sponsored by Vivo and the Anarchy.website.
Hell yeah,
Chloe and
we got
Una's
money.
Tentacular Experience. Make sure to check that out.
Rip Lil Peep.
Rip Little
Check
Pete.
out xn-z7x.dev.
I am getting my variety show thing planned and stuff. I finally have all the ingredients, so if you feel like it, follow me on twitch.tv/Hermes the Magi.
And tune in next week when we'll talk about chapters 3 and 4.
No, don't
Tune in
say
a month
that.
from now.
You're gonna curse us.
You're right.
Tune in 6 months from now.
No. Do not give a deadline and do not give any specifics about what we're doing.
Catch you later,
I
fuckers.
told them the plan at the beginning of the episode. We're going to do 2 chapters a week. We can't at the end of the episode say tune in next week. Otherwise, we'll never do it. So keep listening to the podcast.
Wait,
Play
I
this
got
on
this.
repeat.
Tune in next week for the Goth Angel Sinners episode.
Oh. Tune in next week for the Neighbor Science Block Party.
No, rip. Bring it back.
We invited Ryan.